This is the world we know. 8 billion lives, thousands of years of history, every city, every child, every future we take for granted. But twice in the last century, all of this, everything you see, almost vanished. Not because of an asteroid. Not because of a plague. Because of a glitch. A technical error. And the only reason you are alive to hear this, is because of two men whose names most people do not know. This is their story. To understand what these two men did, you need to understand the world they lived in. By the early 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union had built enough nuclear weapons to destroy every city on Earth multiple times over. Both sides operated under a doctrine called mutual assured destruction. The logic was simple and terrifying: if either side launched first, the other would launch back. Everyone dies. So neither side launches. The problem with that logic is that it only works if everyone stays calm. And it only works if the machines work perfectly. Neither of those things was guaranteed. October 27, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is at its peak. The world above the water is already on the edge of collapse. President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev are locked in the most dangerous diplomatic standoff in human history. Nuclear bombers are in the air. Missiles are on high alert. But what the world does not know is that hidden beneath the Atlantic Ocean, four Soviet submarines are quietly making their way toward Cuba. Each one is carrying a nuclear torpedo with roughly the same explosive power as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Their orders were simple: get to Cuba undetected. What they were supposed to do when they got there, nobody told the crew. One of those submarines was called B-59. It had been underwater for weeks. It had lost contact with Moscow. The crew did not know if the war had already started. The air conditioning had failed. Temperatures inside the submarine reached 45 degrees Celsius. Men were fainting from carbon dioxide poisoning. They were exhausted, overheated, and completely cut off from the outside world. They were running on fear. Among the senior officers on board was a man named Vasili Arkhipov. He was 36 years old. Quiet. Composed. He had survived a nuclear reactor accident on a different submarine just 1 year earlier. He had seen what panic could do. He was not a man who scared easily. Then the Americans found them. 11 U.S. Navy destroyers and an aircraft carrier had located B-59. They began dropping small explosive charges into the water. Not to destroy the submarine, but to force it to surface. This was a pre-agreed signal procedure that the Americans had communicated to Moscow. Moscow never told the crew of B-59. Inside the submarine, those explosions felt exactly like an attack. The hull shook. The lights flickered. Men grabbed each other in the darkness. Captain Savitsky snapped. He had had enough. He was convinced that World War III had already begun above them. He ordered the nuclear torpedo to be armed. He screamed, "We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our navy." The political officer on board agreed. Under Soviet protocol, launching required the agreement of 3 senior officers. 2 signatures were now in place. The nuclear torpedo was armed and ready. The only thing standing between that weapon and the end of the world was Vasili Arkhipov. He said no. In the middle of the screaming, in the heat, in the darkness, with the hull shaking around him, he said no. He stayed calm. He argued. He told Savitsky that if the Americans had wanted to destroy them, they would already be dead. He said these were signals, not attacks. He persuaded Savitsky to surface and await orders. B-59 rose slowly to the surface, surrounded by American warships with their guns trained on the hull. No torpedo was launched. The Americans had no idea how close it had just been. They did not even know the submarine was carrying a nuclear weapon. Vasili Arkhipov went home. He was never allowed to speak about what happened. He received no medal. No. Ceremony. He died in 1998. His family learned the full story years after his death. 21 years later. September 26, 1983. A 44-year-old Soviet lieutenant colonel named Stanislav Petrov arrived for what should have been a routine night shift at a secret early warning bunker called Serpukhov 15, located outside Moscow. The year had already been catastrophic. Earlier in 1983, President Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire. Soviet jets had shot down a Korean civilian airliner just weeks before, killing 269 people. Both sides were convinced the other was preparing a first strike. Soldiers on both sides were sleeping next to their boots. It was the most dangerous year of the Cold War since 1962. Shortly after midnight, the alarm went off. Not a drill alarm. The real one. A wall panel lit up with a launch warning. The satellite system was reporting that 5 American Minuteman nuclear missiles had been launched from United States soil and were now heading toward the Soviet Union. Flight time to Moscow, approximately 20 minutes. Protocol was crystal clear. Reported immediately to the Soviet High Command. They would prepare to launch a retaliatory strike. Millions of people would be dead within the hour. The decision was not Petrov's to make. His job was simply to report what the machines were telling him. Petrov did not make the call. He sat there with sirens screaming around him and 23 colleagues watching, and he thought it through. His mind was working through a problem that no training exercise had ever prepared him for. If the United States was beginning a nuclear war, would they really start it with 5 missiles? A genuine first strike would involve hundreds of warheads launched simultaneously to destroy Soviet defenses before they could respond. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. Additionally, the ground-based radar systems, which Petrov considered more reliable than the satellites, were showing nothing. The satellite system was relatively new. It had known glitches. He had 10 minutes. He picked up the phone and reported it as a false alarm. He later said, "I had a 50-50 chance of being right. I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan." He was right. The cause was later identified as a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds at a precise angle that the satellite misread as missile launches. A 1-in-a-million atmospheric coincidence. The fate of the world had been decided by the angle of the sun. Petrov was briefly acknowledged internally, then quietly reprimanded. Not for the decision he made, but for failing to keep proper written logs during the incident. He received no reward. He was eased out of the military shortly afterward. He spent the rest of his life in a small apartment outside Moscow. He died in May 2017. His death was not publicly announced for several months. Almost nobody noticed. 2 men. 2 separate moments in history. 21 years apart. Neither knew the other existed. Arkhipov stopped a nuclear torpedo from being fired from a disabled submarine at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Petrov stopped a false alarm from triggering a Soviet retaliatory strike that would have ended modern civilization. In both cases, the machines had failed. In both cases, protocol said fire. In both cases, one person said wait. History remembers the names of the people who started wars. It has very little interest in the people who stopped them. But if either of these 2 men had done exactly what their training demanded, what the protocol required, what the machines were telling them to do, you would not be watching this. The city you live in would not exist. The people you love would never have been born. Stanislav Petrov. Vasili Arkhipov. Remember those names. Subscribe. Because next week, we go inside the basement of Stanford University, where an experiment designed to reveal human nature instead revealed something far darker about the people running it.